schedules as we're all in crisis mode. Jason Griffey is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the National Information Standards Organization. Welcome, Jason. Francisca Goldsmith, our longtime collaborator, is a consultant at Library Ronin and the author of several books and has taught many courses on reference. David Lee King is the Digital Services Director at the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library in Kansas. And Lindsay Gervais is the Digital Pedagogy Specialist at Gale. So welcome to the four of you. So glad to have you here. We also want to thank Gale for their sponsorship for making today's event possible. We really appreciate it. We're all pulling together here and trying to do what we can to provide the best services. And with that, let's get into it. So we're just going to unmute all of our panelists so we can all get going. So the first question I'm going to ask, and I guess, Jason, I'll sort of just throw this one to you first. We'll just kind of go round robin in a sort of random order. For people who are starting at square one, I'm sure we've got a lot of people in the audience who have never provided any sort of virtual service from outside the physical library. Where would you start?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to give just the most basic advice here and let some of those that are doing it directly answer more in detail. But I think my first piece of advice to everyone is don't worry about fully replicating the experience of being in the library.
Yeah.
We are all in a moment of crisis, and any service that you can provide is incredibly appreciated by the public. So don't worry about trying to be perfect, right? Just try to meet your users in a way that is useful to them. So if that is literally, phone calls, virtual service by phone is something that we've done for decades and decades and decades, right? You don't have to have, fully virtual VR meeting in cyberspace sorts of things going on. Virtual services can be many, many forms.
I would add to that, Jason, that not only can virtual services be very simple, but at this time of crisis, it's probably better if they are simple. We don't want to ask anybody to learn new technical skills right now.
Yep.
We can learn some for ourselves, but we shouldn't be asking that of our communities.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on that, you can definitely make use of existing resources like social media. If you are the more advanced virtual library, make use of social media. Academics tend to populate on LinkedIn and Twitter, particularly for the humanities. And our K-12 educators are on Twitter and Facebook. So there are a lot of easy ways to reach your educators and your patrons, and heading on social media is a great way to learn how to get started, number one, and then sort of start your momentum going from there. And I think that, to echo Jason's sentiment, I think the two questions you can definitely ask yourself are, what are their basic needs? What are my patrons' basic needs? And then what's the easiest and most simplest way to reach them? And just creating your resources around those two main questions.
Yeah, and this is David.
I was just going to. This is Dan. I'm used to prompting the panelists, but I'm just going to shift the slide to the next question because you guys are already answering it. So, sorry, David. I'll give you a chance to weigh in.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, especially from the public library realm, we probably haven't thought about providing virtual services, but most of us actually are already. If we're offering Overdrive or ebooks or boring traditional databases, we've been offering virtual services in a way, just sort of passively doing it. So I think a good place to start is pointing that out, because even before this crisis, I would meet people who I thought would know better, and they'd be like, "You guys have ebooks for free? That's the most amazing thing ever." So this is the perfect time to say, "Hey, here's all of our digital stuff."
So let me get people to expand on that a little. And David, I'll stick with you. What are the sorts of questions your staff is? What questions are you asking your staff? What questions are you asking your community?
Well, what we're doing quite a bit, scrambling. We are, like I just said, pointing out all of our things. We have switched up our social media to basically be focusing on the digital services we're providing. So we're pointing out all of the downloadables, Hoopla, that kind of thing, sharing what you can do there, pointing out that we're answering questions through our virtual chat reference and email, that kind of stuff still, interacting with people on Twitter and Facebook. We closed, I think, late last week. We're closed through April now. But before we did that, we scampered and made about 40 videos. And so we are sort of spreading those out and posting them on YouTube and Facebook. And people are loving them. So like story time type videos, that kind of thing. So that's what we're getting. The questions we're getting are like, where do I find Hoopla? It's that kind of stuff. And then some questions relate to our physical building. Can I turn my books in? Are they going to be overdue? And we fixed all that for them, but still getting those types of questions.
All right. Thanks, Francisca, Jason, Lindsay. Anyone want to jump in and add something?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been doing all along and continued to do as this was breaking was I checked different libraries' web pages to see what kind of information they're prioritizing on the page. And what I've seen in the last couple of weeks is a wonderful response from a wide variety of both small and large libraries to reconfigure their landing pages so it's immediately obvious. Things like the frequently asked questions: what do I do with my materials? Can I actually return them, et cetera, et cetera? Being the case in one situation and another, making sure that health and safety contacts were front and center on another, making sure that access to how you can actually talk to a human being that is a librarian during the closure, because there are going to be all sorts, especially as this continues on, we will get reference questions as opposed to directional questions. We're going to get more and more questions about health and insurance. We're going to get more and more questions from new homeschooling families who just need the typical sort of thing that children's staff is used to answering all the time. So it's been a pleasure to see that libraries are really coming up with nuanced ways of displaying that just on their website. And I think that's also allowing their own communities to reach out to them and saying, hey, you say you're addressing this, but I really need you to address that. I think that's more effective probably at this juncture than trying to do a survey or something like that.
Yeah, this is Jason. I just wanted to echo something that Dave said, and that was that one of the things I think could be most important for librarians to get across to their communities at this point is the fact that they don't need to worry about things like bringing their materials in, right? Like, right. I hope no one out there is like holding firm on overdues, right? Like, we need to be very gracious in this moment to our communities and understand that whatever rules we've got in place, we need to be real careful about the ones that we're holding firm to, and give people lots of grace and understanding about materials and their expectations and everything. We need to be, really putting ourselves out there to try and help make it easy on our communities.
Thanks, Jason. And by the way, one thing I want to point out, all these questions we are asking, we're asking the panelists, but we're asking you guys too. So we want to hear from you on what you're doing. The audience, as usual, you guys are ahead of us. I was going to ask our panel about if you can just highlight one or two specific tools you're using to provide services or just get your work done right now. And again, people in the audience are all over this already. But if anyone wants to jump in and just talk about a tool or two that you're using.
Well, this is David. New tool for us would be Zoom and virtual meetings. We just held our first library's board meeting virtually last night. So, and all our board members figured it out. Some of them looked sort of interesting. The camera's on. They're not quite used to that. So some people were sitting with the window behind them and they're sort of dark looking, etc. But we're adjusting to that. It was a success. We did business virtually, which was cool.
I definitely would recommend Slack or Google Chat. I think that you can use both of any chat service really to facilitate the level of collaboration and personalization we usually get from face-to-face. Obviously, it's not going to make up for that, that true sense of personalization, but certainly when you have librarians and staff who are working from home, it can expand your reach, beyond even who you would talk to when you're in your library. But I also would encourage using chat for virtual office hours, or using it to assess needs of patrons and educators, and answer any questions that they have.
One of the things that I'm hoping that people do continue to use are telephone as well as text. If you are working from home and you're answering reference questions from the public, also it's obviously a good idea that the library's reference phone number is the one that you're answering, so someone in tech services is going to need to make sure that's rolling over to whoever is in charge of responding to the public by telephone in that given moment.
And this is Jason. I also wanted to just point out a couple of tools that people may or may not be aware of. This is emerging tech and weird tools are kind of my stock in trade. So a lot of libraries, a library-specific tool for virtual reference called Library Help, which help is spelled with a 3, H3LP, Library Help. It's free for 90 days, and it does provide sort of embedded virtual reference tools. You can just throw it in your website. Lots of academic libraries use it. It's a super, super useful tool. And again, free for 90 days when you sign up. A lot of tools are providing sort of free access, like Zoom and others that people have mentioned are providing free access to them to upgraded accounts during the crisis. So things like screen.so, which is a screen sharing tool. It's used by companies to do sort of virtual pair programming. You can work together on the same screen. That's something that's used by a number of sort of help functions to see what somebody else is doing and being able to walk them through something. So if you were helping a patron with virtual do something on their computer, that would be a tool that might be useful. Somebody mentioned Slack, Discord. I've seen that come up a couple of times in the chat. Discord is fantastic. It's a free tool. It's a sort of a Slack alternative. It was originally designed for gaming, but it includes the ability to do things like voice channels where you can have people just sort of hanging out and talking to each other, which is a really wonderful sort of community building opportunity. Again, it's used very heavily by gamers to do that sort of thing, hang out and talk to each other while they play games. So Discord is great. And a couple of other things I'll just mention really, really quickly is so my nonprofit NISO is tracking publisher and sort of information ecosystem responses, which databases have provided free access to things, right? And that's all available on the NISO homepage under NISO.io. NISO is NISO.org. NISO.org is the website, and then IO is our monthly or weekly publication that points things out. We've got a specific page for COVID responses And on that page is a list of databases that have provided free access to things. So that's another opportunity for people to find resources that they can share.
Thanks, Jason. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to put this out there. I think that exploring partner and vendor tools is also an option as well, since a lot of the reference databases have some helpful tools that facilitate either instruction or use of the databases. So I would just encourage an exploration of what those sort of continuity type tools could be within the academic and K-12 vendor tools.
Even in some of the public library tools, Gail, that's a great suggestion, because those tools can teach people who are not used to teaching at a distance learn how to teach better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We're going to need that now.
So I want to get off our script for a second, because I want to respond to an elephant in the room question that keeps coming up from our audience, and that is privacy. Obviously, that is a huge concern. Now, I hope, and I hope our audience doesn't expect us to, we're not going to solve the problem of privacy and the internet here in this webinar, but hopefully we can all just sort of give our own perspectives and best practices. So I'm just going to, we've gotten this question in the chat in a bunch of different forms, so I'm just going to sort of throw it out there in the most general way. I want to know what people's perspective is and what people's approach to privacy is when we're doing things like Zoom meetings and using Google Voice for phone forwarding and providing reference services from our own home Wi-Fi. So I'll just throw that open to the group.
Well, this is David. For our part, I don't think anything has really changed much, because we're still, like on Facebook, we're still posting it as the library. Same with Twitter. Questions we're answering is through LibChat, so it's still pointing to the library. Our Zoom meetings, they're all staff meetings, so I guess the main privacy thing there is you can see inside our homes. Other staff members can.
Only if you turn on the camera.
Well,
you can
yeah,
without the camera.
That's true.
So.
That's true. We're all turning on our camera, so they see a nice plant behind me.
Right.
For our board meeting, that was public. Not that anybody actually came to the board meeting, but they could have. So otherwise, I think for us, it's sort of business as usual. It's just we're doing that business from home right now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's important to be aware of that, though, and that's why it's particularly important to not have the phone numbers be anonymized as you go along. And obviously, even if you're working from home and you are answering confidential questions, you shouldn't be discussing them with the other people in your home, even though they may be the only people you're seeing these days in real life.
Yeah, I think anytime we talk about privacy, one of the when researchers think about privacy, they one of the things that comes up is thinking about what the threat model is, right? Are we concerned? What is the threat model that we are protecting against when we go down our particular privacy stack? So are we concerned about leakage of information about an information seeking process to the vendor that we are using? That is, are we worried about Zoom, recording, storing, tracking, etc.? Well, I mean, yes, a little bit. I think that's a reasonable question and a reasonable thing to look at and examine. It was just discovered yesterday or the day before that, at least it came to my attention yesterday or the day before, that on if you're using the Zoom app on iOS, it sends information to Facebook even if you're not logged into Facebook. I didn't know that. That was a thing that a security researcher discovered. So like those sorts of things are to some degree worrisome, and we should be aware and careful about the tools we're using. On the other hand, we are in a time of crisis, and we do have limitations to the amount of new things we can do inside that crisis. So, would it be better if we were using a self-hosted open source library-controlled video service? Yeah, it would. That would be way better for the world and for our libraries. But most libraries don't have that, and so we are limited in the things that we can do short term. There are open source options. I actually saw someone in the chat mention a service called Jitsi, Jitsi, which is a sort of chat/video meeting service. It's open source and encrypted and secure and all of the things that we like when it comes to privacy. So but do we want to learn a new tool and suggest people use a new tool? Maybe not right now.
All right. Anyone else want to weigh in on privacy before we move on? Now that we've solved that problem forever. Yeah. All right. Well, Lindsay, I want to throw this question to you first. But we've talked a lot about providing services here. But reference services and other services, they're often a collaborative job. And we're all just trying to do our day-to-day jobs. We need to host meetings. We need to collaborate as a staff. So I'm wondering what you feel are some of the best practices for handling your staff or faculty, if you're at an academic institution, collaboration at a time when so many of us are working remotely. And hoping everyone can give us some examples of techniques they've used.
Yeah, I think the first really important thing, especially as we've moved the modality to online, is to just reset expectations. And that can be as simple as reiterating availability. For librarians, maybe posting a Google Calendar, right, that says when you have virtual office hours that you can host on Zoom or a virtual chat for question and answering. Just resetting those expectations, the scheduling, and reassuring the greater public that you're there for them, right? And I think one of the best ways to do that is to, if you want to hold a Zoom or a WebEx town hall, whether it be with your instructors, faculties, institutions, or even your town, pose the question, how can we help support your curriculum or programming for students and families? I think doing that really allows you to sort of also alleviate the level of franticness that might be going on right now, which we'll get to that one later, right? But also just keep an ongoing collaboration. One thing that I like to do, and I used to do with my students, I was an adjunct faculty at the University of Connecticut, is I had a virtual comment jar. And that enabled my students or my colleagues to send me either a Twitter comment. I pinned that Twitter status at the top of my newsfeed. I said, what suggestions do you have? What do you need? How can I help you? And they just made a feed of comments there. If you want to go lower tech, you can sort of do a reply to email or even create just a Google form that seeks out some advice or their feedback. And then from an academic standpoint, I think just aligning with your instructors, reaching out have a phone call, have a Zoom, talk about their learning objectives and see how you can make that happen for them with your existing references. And I think lastly, one of the biggest things, and this overlaps with one of my other comments about tools, is really lean on your partners and your vendors because, as Francesca said earlier, they have also compiled a very large list of resources that can help you promote collaboration and also integrate some of your reference materials and holdings into instruction. And then furthermore, continue to collaborate with faculty and staff on what's working the best. Doing that in a webinar or a Zoom meeting or a chat, Slack, using all the tools that we sort of talked about, even just a phone call can definitely get that going.
Thanks, Lindsay. Talking about collaboration, does anyone else want to weigh in?
I think she covered the waterfront.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. Well, I want to start with you, Francisca, on this one. So how can the library reach the community with information that virtual reference help is available and can address both adult needs for factual info and, this is me in this second boat, people who are newly homeschooling their kids and their needs for informational support? I am a teacher right now, and I'm not getting paid for it. So, and I also realize that the teachers who teach my kids are not getting paid enough either.
I think that has been the national. I think that's been the national wake up this past couple of weeks. First of all, the fact that if we are providing service from a library that's closed, we do need to let the community know, and we need to let them know in more places than just our home pages. Certainly social media is the best place to get a lot of people who are going to be contacting us remotely, but instead of just sticking with the tried and true Twitter and Facebook, be sure also that you're posting to Instagram things about reference and other remote services that you're providing, and make sure to represent as many of them as possible. So making sure to assure people that they can call for factual information about both legal and medical issues. They will not, you will not be giving them advice. However, there's plenty of factual information to be had, and it can allay a lot of anxiety. And also, on a different stream, make sure that they understand that although they probably were accustomed to just having the teacher help with the kids' work or being able to go to a store and immediately buy materials needed by the child, that may no longer be possible. And for those of us who are in states where we're in shelter-in-place situations. So where can we call, where can we turn to get deep information about a person from history that a fourth grader has chosen based on how lovely the person's name sounded? We need to make sure that that kind of reference question is also getting handled. And then thirdly, the thing to say about this is to make sure that we are reaching people in a variety of modalities, not just via reading. So, for instance, if you have the capacity to make YouTube videos or screencasts of how to find materials, do that so that you can push them out in response to specific questions as well as just generally. And also make sure if you've got somebody going to the building to check on its soundness, make sure the HVAC system hasn't blown up, etc. Be sure to use your ground floor windows, and if there's glass in the glass in the door as bulletin boards so that people know that they can call for library help at such and such a time, such and such a number, what the library's website is, etc.
Thanks, Francisca. And I want to address a comment that was made in the audience that I think was a really good point. Someone said, I wish they would stop calling it homeschooling. And I apologize for the misuse of the term, because that is true for a lot of us. There are those of us who homeschool our kids, and then there are those of us who currently are supporting our kids' schoolwork at home. And I think that is a really important distinction to make. So I appreciate, I missed the name in the chat, but I appreciate the person who brought that up. Anyone else want to weigh in on this question?
Sure, this is David. I'll add one thing. So also don't forget traditional media. That's a great way, if you have connections, to get what the library is doing out still. So press releases, if you have a contact list, that kind of thing. My library, we're sort of have a unique connection to a local television station. They do a daily afternoon television show, and every Tuesday we have a spot on that show. Usually it's our marketing director or somebody, sharing something we do. Right now, I think we're going to have to do that virtually, like through Skype or something like that, but we still have that access. I think our marketing director and me, I think we're both going on there at some point in the next week or so, just to share, here are all the virtual tools that you can connect to the library with right now. And yes, on homeschooling, we actually did homeschool all of our kids. So difference between virtual school and homeschool, although it sounds the same.
Yeah, don't
True.
On the traditional media front, this is Jason. Don't forget, local radio stations.
Yes.
Don't forget, all of that. That does get the word out, and they are almost always incredibly happy to drop, 15 seconds worth of, hey, your library is doing this in their patter. So you can definitely get some leverage, some media attention that way.
Well, go ahead.
And for communities that have school districts with strong eateries, make sure to get information into those as well.
And I'm going to do a social media plug again, only because it's just so helpful. For Facebook in particular, it's super easy to search for your town's Facebook page, and posting any of your updates or events on there is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I also very much enjoy like Twitter chats on Twitter, or you joining a Twitter chat where you can become just part of the conversation, and leveraging the hashtags that are associated with that, and just letting people know if you search in Twitter for hashtag librarians at home, you can look at all the information that we contributed and more from the greater community.
All right. I want to bring in a really good and really tough question that got asked in the audience and just get everybody's thoughts. What options are there, if any, for patrons who do not have access to the internet outside of the library? This has been asked over and over again in the chat space.
And don't have access to phone? I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, I think the question's been asked a bunch of times, so that's not, I guess that's not implied one way or the other, but that's a good point.
Well, I will start by echoing the phone thing. Honestly, most people in our community at this point have some type of a smartphone. They might not utilize it well. Even like some of the homeless people in Topeka, they still have a smartphone. It might have a very limited plan. And that's something we can help with potentially, because a lot of internet providers and phone providers right now are sharing low-cost type plans right now. But a lot of them do have that. So just a point to bring out.
I would also encourage researching some internet providers in the area. Now, this is dependent on whether you have the technology to support this, which of course is a bigger problem. Some internet providers are offering free internet for families who have students. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of research around that can help. Mm-hmm. If you have a phone that has data, you can certainly toggle and use hotspots using your internet, using your carrier. But there definitely is some research to be done on if you do not have a phone as well.
And some school districts are making sure that all the Chromebooks that they have in any of the buildings are going to students.
Yeah, I was going to echo a lot of companies are providing free internet access for kids. So if you can gather whatever, if you're a Comcast area or a Charter area, or, whatever the particular monopoly is in your city or state, look around for information so that you can share that with your patrons, because almost everyone is offering some level of free access to children who are now attempting to school from home. The other thing that I would suggest is I think a lot of libraries now are making sure their Wi-Fi is on all the time. It always boggles my mind that libraries turn their Wi-Fi off at night. I know there's a lot of good reasons for it. It still confuses me. But they're intentionally leaving their Wi-Fi on. Some are looking to move some of their hotspots out to the outside edges of their buildings to try and reach out into public space outside as much as possible. So there are definitely things that can be done around your building that don't involve having your building open that can provide people with internet access. Now, it does involve them; they have to have a device of some sort. But even if that device is a smartphone, at least they're not eating their data, which might be capped or limited in some way. So having access to your Wi-Fi from the outside of your building at this point in time is a big deal for your community.
As long as you're in a place where you're not in a shelter-in-place and you can get close to a building.
Of course. Well, depending on the building, maybe the people in the apartments across the way can get to it. But yes, I definitely. I mean, you said earlier, as long as you're not someplace with shelter-in-place, we're all going to be there very shortly. So, it bears thinking about now because we're all headed that way.
I want to amplify, pun intended, I guess, a great point that was made in the chat space. Someone pointed out that, reaching people without internet, one thing we should be doing is connecting with our local radio stations and making sure that they're getting that information out to people, because that is a way that people who don't have internet get information, making people aware. I mean, I know this kind of contradicts the shelter-in-place thing we just said, but, a lot of people are expanding their Wi-Fi into the parking lot. As long as that continues to be a viable option, that can be communicated through the radio. So I think that's great. So thanks to our audience for just contributing so many great things to this discussion. Before we move on to the next question, any of our panelists have any more to add? All right. Well, we'll go back to talking about virtual reference services. And again, since this is unfamiliar, well, I think this is unfamiliar territory for everybody right now, the world we're living in. But I'm speaking specifically about reference. It's unfamiliar territory for some of us. I just want to get everyone's sort of philosophical view. How do you see virtual references being the same, and how do you see it as being different? And I'll just throw that open to whoever wants to jump in.
One of the ways it's very much the same is we still need to be open to what the person actually wants to know, as opposed to what we first interpret based on what their initial question was. So in that way, it's very much the same, and it's a lot harder to remember to be open-ended in our initial inquiries in response to somebody's stated need. But I think we have to remember to do that whether we're on a phone call or chat space or any other remote interaction.
Yeah, I mean, as far as question goes, it's often the same. Question's a question. I think for us, the difference would be, in an in-person environment, you're like, oh, here comes Frank. He always asks a question every day. And how are your kids? That kind of thing. Just that personal connection that you maybe wouldn't probably see as much with a chat question or something like that. But otherwise, it's, business as usual.
Well, we're losing all of the body language that we get in person. And that, as we all know from emails that have been misread from what we intended them to say, it's hard to tell tone when we're just writing. So I think we all have to be more tolerant, too, than we might necessarily be when somebody's in front of us and scowling and yelling.
I think, too, with virtual referencing, too, when you're virtual, somebody probably might have already gone on the internet and done some research themselves. And so there's a little bit of that frustration in not knowing how to sift through all of that information. And so the way that we communicate with those people might be a little different than how we would communicate with them in person. Because they might come into their conversation with you with some preconceived notions and assumptions and maybe irrelevant questions based from their original question with you, right? So being sensitive and also personalizing that conversation to kind of knock down those barriers and understanding is important when thinking about virtual reference, I think.
Yeah, this is David. Somebody in the chat room just mentioned something that's good to point out with the virtual reference. Sometimes when you're in person, you can say, oh, that's a hard question. Give me 10 minutes on that one. When you're doing it virtually, you actually have to type that. Say, I'll get back with you in half an hour, or I need to ask somebody else, or that kind of thing. You have to actually remember to type sort of what you're thinking.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with Lindsay on this next question, and everybody already sort of started to touch on this because when we're online, we're losing that body language. Sometimes we're going by chat, we're even losing tone of voice. So when we're in a virtual environment, how should we deal with stressed out or angry patrons? I know in the physical library, we often have our own guidelines and policies in place, but that gets thrown out the window when we're not there. So Lindsay, why don't we start with you there?
Yeah, I already touched on this a little bit in our last question that was about best practices, but here are 3 strategies, and then I'm going to switch over to some other strategies that are the same when we're working in an online learning environment. So, and really, these are all centered on the fact that all of us, when we are going virtual, we are resetting the unknown, right? And cue music to Frozen Elsa, right, into the unknown. And change is really hard. So people are really unsure on how their relationship with librarians and the libraries will change, within their daily grind, right? For example, the gentleman who would go to the library every day and ask that question, he's unsure of how that interaction would change the next day. So some strategies to offset that, I've already mentioned these. Have some virtual office hours, whether they're on video conference or a Google chat of some sort, or even just I'm available at these times via phone or text, give me a call. Another one is sharing a Google Calendar, as I said. Lay out all of your virtual programming, and if you really want to keep people on their feet and coming back for more, have add in library tips or archives of the day, books of the day. A lot of people I noticed in the chat like to do their storytelling. Add those into the Google Calendar. But I think one of the most important things is create your own, very customized, to your town, to your school, online resource digest. And Francesca mentioned this earlier, that a lot of libraries are doing this, but it really helps people to know that they definitely have a place to go for the questions that they have, for tutorial and access issues, reference holding descriptions, and any supplemental resources. So those are 3 concrete strategies. But when it comes to also, facilitating a mindset, right? We can think about the way we're communicating with one another, right? Our social emotional learning is elevated to its highest in a virtual environment. Personalized, was it David or Jason earlier who said, you definitely have to be explicit when you're writing things. Normally it takes 2 seconds to say, how was your day? How are you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. You do have to type those things out. But it's so important to sort of alleviating some of the stress And then furthermore, I think using a variety of formats to reach your patrons and to talk to your patrons will alleviate some of that, the missing link of that face-to-face interaction. So creating videos you can post on your town Facebook or website, creating videos with instructional tutorials, things like that, will definitely lessen the distance between you and your students, patrons, instructors, etc.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to say, I haven't seen a lot of reports yet about active sort of trolls in the library space in virtual environments. I mean, certainly, I think any public library, most academic libraries have had patrons that may have interacted with the library not entirely with positive intentions, and with an increase in the number of libraries offering, virtual environments for people to reach out to them, there is the possibility that we will see a rise in sort of, what might be called in the gaming world griefing, right? People contacting the library intentionally to cause harm in some way. And so that is a thing I have not seen. I am not sure that it will happen, but it is a thing that I think we should at least consider and have some guidelines for.
That did happen 15 years ago when things like Ask a Librarian and Question Point first came into being.
Yeah.
It was mostly middle schoolers. It wasn't adults. I think at this point in time, we probably won't see that sort of behavior for at least a few more weeks, just because the world is so strange right now.
Yeah. I think I agree as far as the timeline goes, but in our current information in our current information environment, we definitely have sectors of our communities that are not entirely happy with, let's say, facts, and so that could be a problem. So.
Yep.
And I was just going to add to that. I mean, public libraries anyway have customer behavior policies, and it doesn't change when you're online. So just something to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And that really backs up the importance of setting expectations when you are moving virtual. Reset those expectations, pin up a post on your social media, and really double check the comments and everything of what you're posting, so we can ensure that there aren't any trolls out there or bullies or just information that's not going to advance what you're trying to get out there. Because it's a valid problem, but we certainly don't want it to keep people from being innovative and creative and in getting information. And I think when we talk about facts, right, there is a huge issue in where we are today with that, but I think it's a great digital literacy lesson, right? We can use our reference holdings to teach about facts and back up claims with archives or information that we have, which makes use of what we have, right? Our virtual references.
So before we get to our last question, I just want to address one thing that's been going on in the chat space. People have been talking about copyright. Someone specifically asked, how do I respect copyright restrictions if I'm doing an online story time? We've got you covered. We are doing another webinar next week at this time on the subject of copyright in this situation. Normally, under normal circumstances, we would have a link for registration all ready for you right now, but things are moving very quickly here. But if you found out about this webinar, pay attention to the same channels. You'll see the promotions. Check out the American Libraries Magazine website. So we will be covering that next week in another free webinar. And I know, John, you're saying we need that information yesterday. I understand, and we are working as quickly as we can. So finally, this is ultimately a health crisis. That's kind of what brought us all to this place. So we're likely to get a lot of health reference questions. And Francisca, I know this is one of the areas where you really shine, so I'm going to start with you. But let's talk about best practices for handling these. We, of course, want to be helpful, but we've got to be mindful of the limits of our ability. We're not doctors. We can't tell people, when they should go to the hospital or, give them a diagnosis. So how do we handle this?
I think it's important at this point that anybody who is providing information to the public, whether it is from a university, a school, or a public library in a reference situation, to review the ethics around health and wellness reference work. And probably the starting point, and I put this URL into the chat long ago, is to go to publiclibrary.health, which is the website that was built by a collaboration between the National Network of Libraries of Medicine and the Public Library Association. And this is a site that's been built for the last 2 years. So it hasn't just been put together just now because of COVID-19. The things that you'll find there include free databases that are free all the time, that are vetted, that are backed by authoritative science, and that you can either use as reference tools or load right into your library's website in this database area. And it's things like Medline Plus. But also at that site, you'll find resources to help you refine your reference strategy for handling questions that are about medicine and health. And the bottom line here, of course, is that you cannot diagnose and you cannot advise. However, you can and should ask questions in the same way that you would ask questions to better understand what the person's actual information need is. You don't just throw up your hands and say, oh, this is health. I can't do that. But beyond that, the site, publiclibrary.health, also has information about tons and tons and tons of free training that's happening now around health and reference. Much of it is pushed out by the National Institutes of Health and the National Library of Medicine, National Network of Librarians of Medicine. There's an ongoing course called Stand Up for Health, Health and Wellness Services in the Community for Public Libraries. So go just to publiclibrary.health and you'll find a wealth of sources for staff training and also for public use as reference tools.
Thanks, Francisca. And before I open the floor to other folks, I just want to point out we're seeing a lot of questions. We are recording this. The recording will include the chat, and we're also compiling a huge list of links that's going to be in the follow-up email, both from our panelists and links that have been sent out in the chat. So you'll get tons of information in the follow-up. So on this health reference question, does anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I think that was much better than the answer I would have given.
Definitely.
I will say I'm getting a lot of questions these days, not necessarily about personal health, but I've gotten probably a dozen emails over the last few days asking how can we as libraries do something to help like the healthcare system. People are interested in using their 3D printers to print face masks and they're interested in, I've gotten just so many questions about this, and my responses for all of those have been, make sure that what you are considering is something that the healthcare system needs, because right now they do not need anything that is not absolutely necessary for them, right? They don't need to talk to you about what you could do for them because they are very, very, very overwhelmed in many parts of our country right now. So I'm trying to juggle a bunch of those conversations and stuff, but I think that that's something a lot of libraries and librarians might be getting even patron questions about. Can we use your 3D printer to print a face mask? I've gotten a couple of those. So that's something to think about moving forward, is whether how it is that libraries might be useful in that way without stressing the healthcare system even more than it already is.
Yeah, Jason, we actually got that question from one of our staff members. So,
yep.
and we're like, well, let's see what the local healthcare asks for, and then
yep.
we'll try to come alongside.
Exactly. That's been my suggestion. Reach out to your emergency planning for your city, that sort of thing. See if they have a need that they can identify for you, but don't just do things without asking, because that will not help.
All right. Well, before we wrap up today, I just want to thank Gail again. I just want everyone to consider that we are all in this together. I think that's become clear by the chat space in this event. And our partner and webcast sponsor, Gail, is providing open access to curriculum-aligned, learner-friendly resources and continuously updating tools and support materials to help library and education partners like you. Check out gale.com/COVID-19 support. We will put that link in the follow-up email as well, along with the many, many other links. So I want to thank our audience and our panelists. This was just a fantastic event. It's great to see so much sharing of resources. And I hope this was really useful to everybody. As I mentioned, we are planning another event on copyright for next week. Look out for the promotions for that. They should be coming out real soon. Again, we are recording today. You will get an email with the link. You can send that to anyone you want. This event is open to anyone who wants to view it. So with that, I will just say thank you again to everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe. Take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, guys.